Oh, welcome to another episode of Faith Gateway Live. My name is Mark Smith, and I'm your host and the general manager of Faith Gateway, a site dedicated to help you grow and share your faith. In today's episode, we're focused on the multi-site revolution that has expanded throughout the U.S. Now, today's guests are Jeff Surratt, Greg Ligon, and Warren Bird. Jeff Surratt has served on the staff at Seacoast Church and Saddleback Church, overseeing their multi-site ministries. Jeff has served as church strategy consultant as well as pastor of the church planting at Southeast Christian Church in Denver, Colorado, and he's the co-author of the Multi-Site Church Revolution, the Multi-Site Church Road Trip, and the author of 10 Stupid Things That Keep Churches from Growing. Greg Ligon serves as the vice president and director of Multi-Site Church Leadership Communities for Leadership Network, which involves location to visits over 50 multi-site churches. Greg also co-authored the Multi-Site Church Revolution and is Leadership Network's publisher. Warren Bird serves Leadership Network as the world's leading researcher on multi-site churches. He is also 20 years of church staff and a seminary teaching experience. And Warren has collaboratively written 26 books, all on subjects of church health and church innovation. So welcome, Jeff, Greg, and Warren to the show.
Thanks, Mark.
So let's start off for our listeners who may not know what a multi-site church is. How does that differ from a regular local church?
Well, there are a lot of definitions, actually, a lot of ways that people define multi-site. Typically, when we think about a multi-site church, we think about a church that has a campus or a location or a service that's geographically distinct from their original campus. Some of the research that is out there would also count additional services or venues that happen on a particular campus. But in general, when we're talking about multi-site, we're talking about one church literally in multiple locations. So there's some geographical distance that's there.
Okay. So there's this new research project that was just released. Tell me about this research that you've done, how many churches were involved, and what went into that research.
Okay, well, the most important thing to know is the word free. Download at leadnet.org and just type in the word scorecard. And it's got like everything that we've learned in the last, as we did this research, we collected a whole bunch of questions. Hey, how much distance in between campuses should you have? Where do you get a campus pastor? What happens typically the first year growth? What are the costs of multi-site? We gathered questions that people were asking about multi-site. We got over 500 different churches to respond. That's the largest anybody had ever done. And then we illustrated the report, and we found a lot of really breakthrough and exciting things.
Okay, like what?
Okay, well, how many multi-sites are growing was very significant. How many, let me just do a screen share from one of the pieces of the report that shows how many, we asked churches, are you likely to start an additional campus in the next 12 months? And way over half the churches that did the survey, even though they had been multi-site just a few years on average, were saying, yes, this is working so well that we plan to start another campus. So that's the kind of, okay, I'm back to me. Technology worked great. Let me try a few of the things that we learned that that are hard to answer, like or that may need some discussion about. For example, we asked, were you when you started your first campus, when you first went multi-site, and could you have been a little bit smaller? Did you need to be that size, or could you have been smaller? And generally, they were in the 1,000-something range when they started, and generally the majority said, you know, we probably could have started multi-site smaller. And that's the trend we're finding, that mega churches were initially the big domain of, okay, we're zoned out, we've got problems, we can't expand. But this is, others have said, well, we don't have to be a mega church to go multi-site, and have had good success. So it's inching down year after year in terms of the size of church that goes multi-site.
Warren, let me jump in for a minute, Warren. I love the data that says that the 1,000-person church says I could have started smaller. I love when you're saying, hey, smaller churches are doing it. I'm a little interested when you say, and they've all had good success, because I'm seeing churches out there as small as 300, 400, some even 200, and they're either launching new campuses or they're talking about, man, we want to go multi-site. And I don't know that they've all had great success. I mean, I don't think it's a mega church phenomenon, but I also feel like when you launch a multi-site campus, it's a little bit like when you have a baby. You have to have the maturity and the resources and the time and the people around you to raise that baby. And so I see some churches that are, in my opinion, maybe too small going into multi-site because they're not able to launch at a large enough rate to be sustainable, and then now they've got two small children that they're trying to take care of at the same time. So I'd love to hear Greg or Warren, either one of you guys, respond to that, because one of the trends that I'm concerned about in multi-site is, could it possibly be becoming so popular that maybe churches that aren't ready to launch are launching too early? So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, Greg, Jeff, push it a little farther. Tell me what you in your consulting have found as, is there a tipping point that says, below about a certain size, unless you're really unusual, you probably shouldn't think about it yet?
Warren, you just called me Greg, and so I'm deeply offended at that. I'm not talking anymore. No, actually, some of the guys that are out there that kind of help churches with multi-site, we kick around a couple of percentages. One is, how many people should you send to start a campus? I say that you should be able to send at least 10% of your original congregation. A friend of mine says that you should be able to send at least 20%. So let's just put it somewhere between 10 and 20%. If you have a congregation of 300 people, and you start, if you go halfway, 15%, we're only sending 45 people to start that new church. That is that's not a lot. That's not a big critical mass. That's a challenge. And so for me, I recommend churches get to different circumstances, but maybe 500 to 1,000. The thing I really ask them to look at is, are you filling up two prime time? In other words, somewhere between 9 and noon on Sunday morning, two prime time service times before you launch out. Greg, what would you say?
Well, I was going to say another thing that I was just actually with Craig Rochelle last week in Atlanta, and he's a really big proponent of, before you add a campus, you max out what you can do on that existing campus. Of course, they're in a much larger kind of situation, but they're in 7 or 8 services on a campus before they would feel like that campus is really at capacity. There's also another model that's a little bit of a hybrid of that, and that is a church that maybe at that 500 to 1,000 size, or maybe even a little bit larger than that, but they've been able to reach into smaller communities with much smaller campuses. And I think there's a little bit of health in that, because they have part of what you're talking about, Jeff, just in terms of some of the stability and the systems in place. There's a church in Kansas, I think they're serving about close to 4,000 people. The largest community that they're in is about 30,000, and they're in some little tiny towns that the senior pastor says we have more people coming to church than there are on the number on the city limit population sign when you drive into town. And so there's some models that are kind of a little bit of a hybrid of that that I think are being very effective as well.
So Jeff, let me just push a number, and then I'll go to another finding in the survey. If I push the data really hard, I'd say somewhere between 800 and 900 is where people start to show dissatisfaction that the launch didn't go as well as we had dreamed in terms of multi-site. What do you think as the number for the sending campus for its total attendance to be before seriously considering multi-site?
Well, first, and I really appreciate Greg's name drop of Craig Rochelle. Nicely done. That was awesome. I saw Andy Stanley at Catalyst recently, so I don't know. I mean, not it was me and 15,000 others. But anyway, Warren, I'm going to stick with my nebulous answer of 500 to 1,000. I'm also going to back up a little bit and say I totally agree with what Greg's saying. Is there are contexts where starting with 50 people is a huge win. I have some friends that are going into the rural areas, and that's a huge win. So I don't think there's a number. I just am concerned, and we can talk about this later, but I'm concerned about the trendiness of multi-site and some churches maybe that aren't really ready to go getting into it. But Warren, tell us what else.
Okay, another finding, and just an incidental finding. We asked churches. I think, Jeff, this was one of the questions you had suggested. Do you have a church in a smaller city or rural campus? Do you have a? I'm sorry. Let me say it again. Do you have a campus in a smaller city or rural area? And like half of the churches said yes. So that's affirming what you just said a minute ago. Now let's go to a different topic, and that's distance between campuses. We asked two questions on that. One is, how far is your closest present next campus? And we gave them like time distances, whether that's a commute, a drive, a walk, depending on whether it's urban, suburban, whatever. And then we asked, what would you recommend as the ideal? And a bigger number said our existing situation is 15 minutes or less, but the ideal would be 16 to 30 minutes distance. Greg or Jeff, thoughts?
Well, I think it depends on context again. People are always looking for that rule of thumb, right? And so somebody came up with, oh, it needs to be 20 minutes. Well, 20 minutes works in some places. 20 minutes doesn't work in other places. Are you going into a different what's your goal, right? So if your goal is simply to get people out of your auditorium because you have no more room, then the closer you go, if you can match the experience, the better off you are. Another question is, are there distinct geographical or demographic differences between the communities? So if you can go 5 minutes away. I was just with a church in the Dallas area. Their second site is literally 5 miles, 3 miles from their original site. But the demographics are so different between those two sites. In fact, the people at the second site don't like driving over into the neighborhood of the first site because that's where all the rich people live. And so there's a lot of factors that go into it. I think you have to pay a lot of attention to your culture, your demographics, your geography to figure out what that ideal site is.
So guys, let me jump in real quick. So how many people in the U.S., who go to church are going to a church at a multi-site these days?
I'll take that one, and I want to look it up. So ask another question while I look up the number.
I'll ask it because I think what Jeff's alluding to is that, okay, we had the early adopters, let's say 10 years ago. Okay, and then we've crossed over to where now it's taken off, and more churches are doing this as a viable model, essentially turning their main campus into they're the franchisor, and now these franchisees are setting up multi-site, and like any other franchise, if I were to go launch a Subway, the reason I would do that is that I bought into that model, right? I've got certain branding, it's a certain look and a feel. I can't, as a Subway franchise owner, just tomorrow say, well, now I'm just going to be Mark's Sandwiches, right? So two questions. How does a church know that it's ready to be franchised? There have to be, because not all churches are ready, right? Are they healthy in and of themselves as that first main campus to be franchised? Second of all, who's then becomes, that ideal candidate to go run one of these multi-sites? How do you pick the right campus pastor who is willing to be, a franchise manager as opposed to starting his own church with his completely separate flavor?
All right, Mark, you ask a lot of questions. This is going to be a good discussion. I'll give just a small piece.
All right.
5 million people last weekend in the United States were part of a multi-site congregation.
Okay.
They were, if you see my screen share there, the larger you are as a church, the more likely you are to be a multi-site. So of the 10 biggest attendance churches in the United States, 9 out of 10 of those are multi-site. So size has something to do with going multi-site, but there are a whole lot of other reasons that Greg and Jeff will now add to.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a franchise model, and I would say that that's one of the models. It's not the only one, but in the broader question is, how do you know that you're ready to go multi-site? And I think that one of the things that we often answer that question by answering the reasons why you don't go multi-site, and the biggest one is to jumpstart growth. Many people have thought, okay, this is the way my church is kind of stagnant, there's not a whole lot going on here. I'll just add another campus and we'll be able to get this thing going again. And actually, that's exactly the wrong reason to do it. And why, if it's not going well at one campus, you want to take it across town. So one of the things is, if there's one of the great indicators for success is if your campus is healthy and growing, MultiSite gives you a means by which you can sustain that growth. So that's one of the reasons why you would make a decision to go multi-site, and that you're ready for multi-site as well. The other is specifically related to having a very specific strategy or reason. Perhaps it's a demographic group that you're wanting to reach that nobody in your community is reaching, and so you may establish a campus to reach directly into that demographic group. Another reason why many churches decide to add a campus.
Yeah, I talk to churches a lot of times about this idea of, should you be going multi-site? And some of the things I talk to them about, exactly what Greg said. One of the things I want to know, and Mark, you alluded to it, are you healthy? I mean, are you a healthy church? Because one of the things we've said, I think in our very first book, Revolution, we said, if you're not healthy, please don't export your disease. Another thing that we said is going multi-site, if you're not growing in some way, shape, or form, is kind of like trying to give birth without being pregnant. So you really want to look at that pregnancy piece. So first of all, are you healthy? And there's a lot of things to look at in health. I won't get into that, but you really need to examine the health thing. Another reason to look at is, are you healthy? Are you growing? In other words, we talked about it a while ago. Life Church will tell you should be full in 8 weekend services. Life Church is a freak of nature. I love those guys. They're awesome, and no one else can do what they do. So if you can replicate Life Church, that's awesome. But for most of us mortals, if you are not filling up 2 weekend services, then something I've discovered, I've been doing this as long as these guys have. I think got into this in 2002, so 12 years. I'm not good at the math. 14 years I've been doing this, and the one thing I've discovered is growing on multiple locations is a lot harder than growing on one site. So sometimes churches will say, oh, we're stagnant here, and Greg alluded to this. We're stagnant here. We can't grow here, so we're going to go over here, and we're going to grow there. Well, probably you're not. Probably you're going to wind up with is a lot of complication. You need to figure out the problems here. What's stopping you here? Now, it might be we don't have space. It might be we don't have parking. Those are all real issues, and MultiSite can solve those. But again, MultiSite is going to bring more problems than it solves. It needs to be a response rather than an initiative to growth. Larry Osborne, who we all respect greatly, and got to know Larry through Leadership Network years ago, and something Larry said at our very first gathering, of the very first leadership community that Greg and Warren put together, is he said that MultiSite is a lousy engine for growth. He said it's a good response to growth, and so I think that's a piece of it. Yeah, so I don't want to dominate here. We can talk about campus pastors as well.
All right, before we go into campus pastors, let me just say.
Before we get, sorry to interrupt, I want to take a question from one of the viewers right now, and then we'll jump back in if you don't mind. Sure. Okay, so Rodney Arnold asked this question. Okay, what are the biggest blind spots to look for when preparing to go from 2 to 3 campuses? A very specific question here.
Yeah, it's a great question because as the North Point crew said at one of our gatherings, it's easy to give up 1 kidney, but giving up 2 kidneys is a whole different challenge. And many churches do one as their first offsite, and it's an easy thing. It's a shuttle back and forth, a rotation of pastors. It's everybody knows each other. But when you start to do more than 1 campus offsite, now your whole system has to change. You have to become a church of multi-site, not a church with multi-site. One of the questions in the survey that really surprised me, and the survey, by the way, free download, leadnet.org, and then on the homepage, you'll see a search box, type the word scorecard, and it's there. And by the way, those of you that are 4 or 10 or more campuses, go to leadnet.org/multisite. We've got gatherings just for churches crossing the 4 to 5 group and for those crossing the 10 or more group. But anyway, back to the campus pastor and all. And oh no, I forgot the question. Help me.
No, okay. So this, he has 2. He has 1
right,
multi-site.
And, right. And the
yeah.
surprising thing from the survey was we asked, when did you start doing a central services function at how many campuses? And I was absolutely surprised at how many said when we were 2 campuses going to 3, we restructured in order to make it work with the central services idea.
So let's go on that central services. Okay, so what are those services that need, that make sense to centralize, like, HR or IT or creative, that are key to support, to build up that infrastructure so you can support multiple campuses?
Well, let me back that down just a little bit, Mark, because what I run into is, because there's books and there's articles and there's examples, and when we started, there weren't a handful of multi-site churches. Warren, how many multi-site churches have you guys? What's the number that you say now that there are?
Well, we say 8,000 broadest definition, about 5,000 that are off-site multi-sites, which is what we're talking about, and Leadership Network actively tracks with almost 2,000 of those.
Gotcha. So there's tons of models to follow, and what I'm finding is churches have grabbed onto this central service idea. And Warren remembers sitting in a room when Life Church or North Point or one of those guys first said, hey, we ought to have central services. Well, they were 3, 4, 5, 6 campuses in. So one thing I encourage churches is don't get caught in the central service conversation at one campus. You don't have central services. You have a church and you've started another site. That site actually acts a lot more like another service than it does a whole separate entity. I think churches overcomplicate too early. They try to build this structure that they don't know what they're going to be. So I always encourage churches, don't build a structure for what you're going to be until you figure out who you are and what's next. And so early on, you don't need central services. You know how to have a church. The illustration I always talk to churches about is this 2 to 3 is a great example. It's kind of like going from 2 children to 3 children. I only have 2. With 2 kids, life is really complicated. We have to coordinate schedules and all of those kinds of things. But everyone I've ever talked to who has 3 kids says that's when everything breaks down, because you can't play man-to-man defense anymore as parents. Now you have to move to a zone. I find the same thing with campuses. It's 2 to 3 off-site campuses is when you really begin to look at this central services thing. I'll let Greg or Warren go more into that. Let me just say one thing. What I recommend, start with the easy stuff. And when I say the easy stuff, that's the black and white, yes or no. That's the business practices. That's IT. That's the back office things. Those are the easier things to centralize, and then work your way into the ministry side. And Greg or Warren, if one of you guys want to talk about that some more.
That's exactly what our survey said. HR is the first thing, and the counting of offerings and all that was centralized. Greg, and then I'll introduce another research finding.
Yeah, I think the keys to central are the things that you can build once and use multiple times. And so early on, that is kind of the basic IT, HR, those kinds of back office things that Jeff's talked about. And then as you grow and as you add more campuses, then there does become opportunity to develop some more of those. But anything that you can gain leverage on, you can be a better steward of resources on by creating once and then being able to allow that to be executed in multiple different campuses. The other thing that's a real important piece of the conversation about central is dependent on your model. If you are more of a franchise model, Mark, as you've referenced, there's a whole lot more that you can centralize. If you're a model that's not quite as strongly driven by that, but you have kind of more of each campus has a little bit of a regional feel and flavor and feel, there's some of those things that become more difficult to replicate and to add into your central support package as well.
Okay, so Warren, before you get into the next one, I'm going to help direct you on what part of the research, because we have a question from Jason Garcia, who said, is there a staffing strategy? Which positions are generally the full-time, paid positions, part-time, and then maybe volunteer to get a new multi-site going, based on what have you found in your research?
Great question, Jason, and that's one of the very questions that we ask in the free report, leadnet.org, and go to punch in the word scorecard in the search page, and you'll see a couple of pages on that. The gist is campus pastor position, whatever you call it, campus director, but the most common is campus pastor, is typically the first paid position. And the question, where do you get your campus pastors from? In the survey, which we also asked, 87% of churches said they grew them up internally. Now that could be someone who's a layperson in the congregation, or it could be a staff we got from somewhere else that we grew and developed and made sure they got our DNA before, for like 6 months to a year, before we sent them out to another campus. And that loyalty is key. Name dropping moment. I was having dinner with Bill Hybels a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him how often he meets with his campus pastors, and he looked me in the eye without pausing a second. He said, every week. Now, reality is it's not quite every week because of travels and other things, but that is a high priority to connect with the pastoral level. Then the next most common role, I believe, is the worship leader and a small groups person, and often something to do with children. Now, they may be part-time or heavy volunteer, but that's kind of the what we saw as the trend of the staffing. Greg or Jeff?
Well, and before we do this, we have about 5 minutes left, but I do want to plug the 2 books. I mean, I think this makes a good package for people who are already doing multi-site or considering multi-site. We have 2 books that are right there on the live page. MultiSite Church Revolution, MultiSite Church Roadmap, plus this research report that's on the Leadership Network website, available for $99, and you just click on the link and get that. I think these are essential resources, especially because one of the things that you point out in research, how much does it cost to launch another another multi-site? How much does it cost on average, and then how do churches fund each campus?
Guys, I can't drop any names because I'm not sharp like you guys, but these are my granddaughters, and so I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
All right.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Mark? How much does it cost?
Yeah, but how much does it cost on average? I mean, how much does research say it costs to launch a multi-site?
I'll let Warren hit the research piece, but I get this question all the time, and my answer is, how much does a car cost? And it's the same answer. What are you going to launch? How big is it going to be? What model are you going to use? We have some friends who launched a campus in the Atlanta area, and it cost $45 million. We also have another friend who's launches campuses around the world, and he can do it for less than $5,000. So it's very, very specific to your model.
And in addition, the payback is also specific to your model. We ask in our survey, what are your expectations for how soon a campus should be self-supporting? Should it be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And the choice that got the most votes were, we expect the fair share timing to differ significantly between campuses. So if you're going into an economically depressed area and you realize, hey, this is a ministry where it's never going to pay back, many churches make that commitment. Or if you have another situation, you can expect the campus to carry itself much faster. Okay,
because there's a question from Dustin Bryson, who says, how do revenue streams work after the plant, after the multi-site plant? Does the planted church pay into a pool to fund the next multi-site church plant?
Well, I'll take that one. I think that, again, models are different, but in many cases, there is some kind of a pay-it-forward kind of strategy in which a campus would pay into a central fund. Sometimes that helps to cover the cost of any of the centralized operations that they're receiving benefit from. but then also there may be a percentage that goes into a fund that then helps churches or helps the church to develop additional campuses. I think, Jeff, at Seacoast, they've done it a variety of ways. I know at one point in time it was, I think 80% went toward operating the campus and 10% toward central and 10% toward paying it forward, but all different kinds of percentages. But in many cases, there is something that the individual campuses are helping to pay in to spread the growth of the church.
Okay. Well, hey, it's we're getting ready to wrap up, so I'd like to give each of our speakers an opportunity to kind of, 60-second kind of where is multi-site going, what trend should we be paying attention to, and then just a reminder that all these questions, a lot of them are answered in the 2 books, plus the digital resource kit, and the links are available on our website, especially with a special discount we're offering. If you type in Revolution in our store, not only do you get a deep discount on the books and free shipping. So we're trying to make those available as much value as possible. So with that, Jeff, you want to take 60 minutes, then each of you take the last wrap-up type deal.
Sweet, Mark, and it was a faux pas, but you said 60 minutes, so I'm going to go with it.
Shoot. Okay.
Also, free shipping is great. If you guys want to drop by my house, I've got a couple extra books here, so I'd be glad to sell them to you out of my basement. Couple of things going on in MultiSite that's fun to track. One is, especially among younger church planters, younger leaders, they are intrigued with the idea of MultiSite as a church plant strategy. And so their whole idea is, can we start them out and give them a real boost? And part of the survey stuff that we didn't get to today is campuses are more evangelistic and grow faster than new church plants. And so can we take advantage of that and then spin them off as churches down the road? I think that's a lot of fun. We'll see where that goes. Wayne Caderos in Hawaii has been doing it for years, and it's a cool model. The other thing that we see going, and maybe can hand this over to Warren from here, but the trend of merging with other churches, existing congregations. I see it more and more. I was with a large Methodist church last week, and they are working with their local diocese, or I'm not good with the names, but the local area, and are starting to work on coming in and turning some dying churches into multi-site campuses. And so those are the 2 things I see that are very, very exciting going on right now in multi-site.
And let me affirm, you'll see the little table I've got up there, 1 out of 3 campuses start by way of a church merger. That is really significant, and we actually were so surprised when we discovered that a few years ago when we did another survey. We asked it again in this survey and found it was even higher than 1 out of 3. And my concluding point would be to underscore what Jeff was saying about church planting. Church planting and multi-sites feed each other. They aren't one or the other, but if you are a church planter, you are more likely to be multi-site. If you are a multi-site, you are more likely to be a church planter. So they are not adversarial, but they are partners, and many church plants begin intentionally as multi-sites. And our books tell lots of stories of how that happens.
Greg, last word?
Yeah, you bet. I'll kind of jump in on that as well. I think one of the things that I think is a new thing that's happening, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of, as particularly with churches that have 8, 9, 10 campuses, they're beginning to talk about multi-site, not just in terms of adding campuses, but in terms of networks and movements. And I think we're going to see some really exciting things happen there. Same time as you're seeing the bigger stuff happen, I'm really excited about some of the smaller niche kind of ministries that are happening, where churches are being able to use this strategy to go into a particular community, a particular demographic space, and really take the gospel. It's exciting from the very beginning. We did our first research, and I think this is our 3rd study that Warren's conducted. Still, number 1 reason that churches go multi-site is to advance the gospel and to give people more opportunities to come to faith in Christ. And so that's an encouraging thing to me, and one of the things I'm most excited about in terms of our involvement with this movement.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being part of the Faith Gateway Live episode, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And